Welcome back to Empowered. This week we sit down with World Impact Ministry developer and Los Angeles pastor Cedric Nelms as he shares about leading in spaces without direction.
Hi, I'm Cedric Nelms, ministry developer with World Impact. And I'm on the West Coast, so I'm stationed in Los Angeles. Today I'll be talking about leading in spaces without direction, which is an interesting narrative for the simple fact that a lot of times when you're doing ministry, especially in the urban context, you know where you want to go. Sometimes you just don't have the direction on how you're going to get there. And so one of the things that I've noticed, especially with doing ministry in the context in which I do it, this particular topic and theme can be far reaching. It's not just about being a pastor. It's not just about being a ministry leader or urban leader. It also reaches as far as doing youth work as well. Sometimes when you're dealing with trying to figure out how to build out the ministry and how you want it to be seen is difficult. And what I mean by that is we can have a concept in our minds of how we want something to be. Usually when it's in our minds, we want it to be very beautiful. And so I use the analogy of relationships, in particular marriage as well. When we get married, we have the rose petals falling from the sky, the champagne is flowing, we have the twinkle in each other's eye, and all of that is great. But then the reality sets in, typically after the honeymoon, and that's when life gets really difficult. That's when all of the champagne has been served, all the rose petals have turned dark, and now you're trying to figure out, what do I do as far as this marriage is concerned with the other person? That's how ministry can be. Ministry can be the roses of God calling you into ministry, of the holy, blessed wine of the Lord that was served at the wedding is flowing, but then you run into people leaving. You run into not having enough financing for the programs that you want. You run into facility issues. You run into not having enough youth or having more youth than you have teachers. These are all things that cause the leadership that you're giving to whatever area of ministry you're working in to have a little bit of difficulty. That's when you need direction. And so just a few things I would share out with you is that I've learned over the years. I've been working with World Impact for the last 2.5, going on 3 years. I'm a local pastor and been pastoring a church for the last, on paper, 9 years. We relaunched our church 4 years ago. One of the things that I've learned from leadership is that you cannot do it by yourself. I heard a saying in a meeting I was in: if you want to go faster, you go by yourself. If you want to go further, you go with a team. And so when you're talking about leadership and you're talking about direction, you need a team with you. You need someone who is another voice in the room. We can trap ourselves in our minds when your voice is the only voice that you hear. You got to have some other people. So I would say team is a very big part of leading into those spaces without direction, because a lot of times your team will give you the direction to your leadership. With World Impact and also at my local church, team building has been very important. We have an urban church association, and one of the things that we discovered with our urban church association was that we wanted to expand it. And so we were meeting locally in Los Angeles. We had an English and Spanish one, but then we wanted to see if we could capture more pastors that were on the southern end of Los Angeles. We call it the South Bay. And we were meeting with pastors in Los Angeles, and as we wanted to see more growth, we started having meetings in the South Bay. And I never will forget when we started doing these meetings, and we were meeting kind of on a introduction orientation type level. As things started to grow and as people started to come, one of the issues that came up was how do we do ministry and we don't tire ourselves out. And we were able to bring some of the resources that World Impact has to the table to encourage them to come and be a part of our Evangel School of Church Planting Ministry. And also we were able to share out some of our trauma healing training with them as well. And so from that, it kind of showed them how coming together once a month with fellow pastors not only helps them individually, but then it helped their ministry as well. Because of us sharing that information at the table, they were able to take that back to their church and help strengthen their team. So when we talk about team building, a lot of times it can come from inside of the ministry that you work with, but then sometimes it can come from just the connections and the network that you have and the people that you're associated with. And so that was an instance of team building. Team building has helped me on a local pastor level because when we first planted, we didn't really have a team. The team was me and my wife. Now I've learned over the years that if it's just her and I, we tend to tire out a little bit quicker. We've been able to build a team over the years that helps us to delegate responsibility so that it's not just one or two people doing it. We are able to delegate it and take the pressure off of just doing it ourselves. So when you talk about team building, it helps to be able to delegate certain responsibilities out that you don't always have to do, that the team can then take responsibility for and the team can give input to as well. The other thing that I will say is have some accountability. Have some people around you that can keep you accountable. We see nowadays that a lot of leaders are dying on the vine because they feel like they are on the island of Patmos like John was when he heard about the book of Revelations. Those are spaces to where, and you need someone to keep you accountable. You need someone who is able to hear not only what you're saying with your mouth, but what you're saying with your heart. I have several accountability partners. Because of being in ministry, sometimes you get to the point to wherein you think that you can do whatever it is that you're capable of doing. I call it the Messiah complex. We put our cape on and we think we are Batman and we got to go save Gotham and nobody else can beat Batman, not realizing that Batman had a Robin. Batman had a sidekick. Batman had somebody who was able to kind of call him on the carpet, so to speak, and that was Robin. That's what it's like to have an accountability partner. When we get to the edge of our cliffs and we think that the only way that we can get to the bottom is by jumping, we need an accountability partner that can show us there's a stairwell on this side of this mountain that we can walk down. You don't have to jump off the cliff. An instant when I had to have a good accountability partner was when we were trying to make a decision on what we were going to do as far as buildings work was concerned. We had to move from one location to another location. We were moving from one part of the city to another part of the city. And for me, it put me in a position to where I was angry. I was in a space to where and I didn't know how I was going to lead my church. I didn't know where we were going to go to, and I had no sense of direction. It was only because I had an accountability partner that first said, let's stop and pray. And after we prayed, we developed a plan for what's the worst thing that could happen. And that accountability partner literally talked me off the edge because I was at a point to where I wanted to throw my hands up and say, you know what? I don't need to pastor a local church. I don't need to do ministry at all. I can just be a 9-to-5 worker and that's it. But only because I had an accountability partner, I was able to look at the situation. Instead of the glass being half empty, I looked at it as being half full. after having that accountability partner speak into my life. And so, first of all, have a team. Second of all, have an accountability person. The other thing that I would say do a lot of, my last two hit very close to home for me. One of them is to have do scenario planning. Be sure that you lay out what the scenario is, and you do it from a perfect perspective, but then you throw in those intangible things that will happen. Yes, we want a ministry that is thriving to where we got 500 volunteers, to where we got children coming all across the city, to wherein we don't have to worry about funding. We want to get to that point to where we got so much funding we can say, no, we don't need any more money. That's the perfect scenario. The imperfect scenario is figuring out how things are going to happen and where those things will happen and how do we get over those hurdles. And so scenario planning helps that a whole lot. When I first came on board for World Impact, I had a nice sized staff. Over the last year or two, my staff has shrunk. So it's gone through a decrease. And so when you talk about planning to do ministry, how do we engage with urban pastors and local churches when we don't necessarily have the man-woman power to do things? You got to have scenario planning. So we have to plan out when we're going to do certain programs. We have to plan out how those programs are going to look and what kind of impact we're going to have in the city. And so when you talk about scenario planning, you have to start with your why. And so one of the things that we are working on and have been working on for the last year or so is, why do we need men's retreat? Why do we need urban church associations? And one of the things that I've learned from my why is, we were having an urban church association meeting, and one of the pastors stood up at the end and said, this is the first time to wherein I've gotten the questions that I have not asked answered. And it was only through that urban church association meeting that I was able to see that's our why. He wanted to do ministry differently, but he had not been released to doing it. And it was only because we sat down as a team and as a staff and determined and answered the question for ourselves, why do we need another urban church association? We need it because there are pastors that need to know the answers to questions that they have not asked. And so that was a good representation for me to let me know that there's more planning that we have to do, and there's more scenarios that God wants us to move into. And the only way we can move into that is by planning and answering the question of why. The other thing that I would say, and this is my final point, it would be balance. I think balance is very important. A lot of times in ministry, we are used to wearing different hats. It's always been said, as ministry leaders, as urban pastors, we do everything from work the parking lot to singing a song, to playing a musical instrument, to giving the word, to being the person that's over word and sacrament, to when everybody leaves, we're left in the building sweeping up because we're also the janitorial service. So we need balance. And balance is found to wherein we are not pouring ourselves exclusively into only one thing, that sometimes we have to have what I call our Jesus moment. Jesus always separated himself away from the group, and he went away to pray and to have solence and communion with God. We need to have the balance to wherein we back off of doing some of the things that we do for ministry, because ultimately that will help us with our direction too. Balance is something that I have difficulty with because I am an urban leader. I go 24/7, 365 days a week. I don't really know what sleep is, so I don't balance myself, and that could be unhealthy. And the balance for me, or the instance where I knew I needed balance, was I went to the doctor, and the doctor was doing what doctors are supposed to do. Doctors are supposed to tell you the worst case scenario. And the doctor told me that not only did I have to get healthy physically, but that my mental state was not helping my physical state. So I had to learn how to take days where I call them moments to where I have to shut everything off. I have to shut my phone off. I have to not get on social media or my laptop answering emails. And what I was taught was I had to find a quiet space either in my house, or what I decided to do was I found a park wherein this park is at the top of the hill. You've seen it on some movies where they have this Korean bell, and the Korean bell is located at a park, but the park overlooks the Pacific Ocean. And when you go there, they have benches around and stuff like that. That's the place where I go and I just sit and I look at the ocean. And it's something very calming about looking at the ocean, but you're hearing the crashing of the waves. And that was my space to usher in kind of cliche, a kumbaya moment for me, which it allows me to release all of the pressures and all of the struggles that go into doing ministry in the urban context. And I needed that, and that's led me into working out more. That's led me into creating a date night with my wife. That's caused me to have more moments of sitting down and actually, I won't even say talking with my children, listening to my children. Because as leaders, you always want to fix it. You got to understand that God wants to balance you out to wherein for every great leader that was in the Bible, he or she had a moment to where they had to listen to God. And so balance now for me is about listening to God and allowing myself space, and also giving myself the opportunity to say, I need some time away from the fray of ministry so that I can go commune with God. And so when we talk about leading in spaces without direction, those four elements, from team to accountability to scenario planning to balance, usually will help us as far as finding out how we can lead better in those spaces without direction. There are several books that we'll have on this particular podcast that will help you out. But I've read different books from different authors that have really helped me over the years. And we'll share that out as we go along. So I just want to thank you for this time.
Thank you again for joining us, and remember, the conversation doesn't end here. If you have questions or topic suggestions, you can reach out to us on social media. That's World Impact Inc. on Facebook and Twitter, and World Impact on Instagram. Or you can send emails to empowered@worldimpact.org.